All right, so today's Lunch and Learn, we're going to make some quick ones here. It's more of like a bite-sized Lunch and Learn, but today we're going to look at the changes that happen in your body when it comes to cardiovascular training, endurance training, and what they are and what is most important and how it relates to you and how you can use this to your advantage. So, one, you have central changes. Central, think heart, central of your body. And two, you have peripheral changes. So think mostly it's going to be leg muscular changes in the legs for most cardio. Swimming would be a little more upper body. But central is going to be your heart, lungs. Peripheral is going to be the peripheral muscles that are actually doing the actual motion. So the changes centrally are one, we look at our maximum heart rate, and that pretty much does not change. We're kind of, depending on how old you are, determines your maximum heart rate. And it's very individual too. Some people are still higher at the same age. But most people's is going to be close to 220 minus your age. So for me, that's 175 right now, which is about right. Okay? But then two, what does change is your stroke volume, which is the amount of blood and oxygen your heart pumps every beat. And so a significantly trained endurance athlete has twice the stroke volume of a normal person. So they're pumping twice as much volume of blood every single beat. Therefore, they're delivering twice the amount of fuel and oxygen to those muscles, which makes a big difference. Hence why they can go so much longer and farther and faster. So training that heart on a consistent basis by doing cardio is what builds up that stroke volume. Okay, it makes our heart actually bigger, stronger, and a stronger contractile force, pumping more blood every beat. Okay, so those are the two main changes that happen. Well, the one main change that happens centrally is a stronger heart, more blood and oxygen pumped per beat. Now, two, you have peripheral changes. So peripheral, again, let's look at running as an example. The main changes are you're going to develop more capillary density in those working muscles. Okay, so more capillaries to diffuse the blood, which lengthens the amount of time the blood can stay in those muscles and therefore keeps the delivery of the oxygen going on a regular basis. Versus if you have very little capillaries, it just filters through there and right back out. There's no chance for the muscles to extract the oxygen. And two, the other change there is you develop more mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. They actually take the oxygen and convert it to usable energy. So you have more capillaries to keep the blood in those muscles longer. And two, you have more mitochondria to utilize that blood and oxygen and actually put it to good use. So what they have found, by and large, the biggest impact on our cardio training is still somewhat up to debate, but is the central. So the biggest change happens from increasing your stroke volume, which is just a steady diet of consistent cardio exercise and some high intensity intervals to really strengthen that heart muscle and build that stroke volume. But it is also very important to develop those peripheral adaptations, and that's why you see somebody who's a great runner is maybe a terrible swimmer and they're out of breath. They can run great, not out of breath, but then they swim and they're out of breath after 2 laps. And that's because they have no peripheral adaptations in their arms, shoulders, lats, upper body. So therefore there's no capillary density up here. There's no mitochondria built up here. That's all location specific based on the exercise you're doing. So therefore that muscle, that blood pumps strongly there, but there's nobody to take it. There are no workers to take that fuel and put it to work. So they have to really build up those peripheral adaptations by swimming on a regular basis. So that is also very important. But if you're looking at one particular thing, you want to really build up that stroke volume and you're going to get the changes too peripherally. Now, a good way to test if your stroke volume is improved is your resting heart rate. So that is something that changes with regular cardio training. So say your average or your resting heart rate is 75 beats per minute, which is pretty normal. If you build up your stroke volume and after 6 weeks of training, it's likely to be 60 beats per minute, so 15 beats fewer. And what is the reason for that? The whole reason is you have much greater blood being pumped every beat. Your stroke volume has increased significantly. So your heart can beat 15 fewer times per minute and still deliver the same amount of blood. So that is proof that you have increased and improved your stroke volume. Hence why athletes like my wife Sally has a resting heart rate of 37 beats per minute, because it pumps twice the amount of blood as a normal person. Therefore, she has so much more fuel going to her working muscles when she's training. Now, one other thing that's interesting is blood doping and the oxygen carrying capacity. So red blood cells are what carry our oxygen. And the old school fashion of blood doping was you would take blood cells from your body, store it for a few months, train, build back up your red blood cells, and then pre-race, you re-inject all those other blood cells. So you really increase what's called your hematocrit, the percentage of red blood cells in your bloodstream. So you really increase the amount of oxygen carrying capability of your blood. Therefore, more oxygen gets delivered to your muscles. This can make a huge impact on performance, upwards of 10%, which an elite athlete, 4 to 10%, which is what it affects it, makes a huge difference. That's the difference between winning and coming in last in an endurance event. So that's old school blood doping, is you take it out, you re-build back up, and then you put it back in, and you're super natural. The newer way is something called EPO, erythropoietin, which stimulates red blood cell production without having to blood dope. So you just simply take EPO, which is what all the Tour de France people take, etc., and it builds up your hematocrit to really high levels. The danger is if you get too high and you don't know what you're doing, your blood becomes so thick from these red blood cells that it becomes sludgy and can actually cause heart attacks and death. All right, so that is the danger if you don't know what you're doing with EPO, is you can kill yourself. So higher blood, if you do it naturally though, there's really no danger at all with that. That's when you get into the unnatural forms of increasing your red blood count that you're in trouble there. All right, so another way you can do that though is living at altitude, or if you're born at altitude, you have the biggest advantage, because your body learns how to carry more oxygen because it's living in these areas with low oxygen. It learns how to make the most out of it. So your body increases its red blood cell count to carry more oxygen. So that's why you'll see lots of athletes move to the mountains and train there and build up their red blood cell, their hematocrit. And then when they go back down and train or actually compete at sea level, they're just blowing it out of the water because they have such a higher oxygen carrying capacity. And they'll do well at altitude as well. So those are the main things, and you could go into deep detail on each one of these things. But to recap, the central component is our heart rate. Our max heart rate's pretty set, not much to improve there. But our stroke volume, the power and contractility of the heart, the amount of blood per beat makes a gigantic difference. The red blood cell carrying capacity, so we want to increase that. If you live at altitude, that's the best way to do that, short of taking drugs, etc. And then 3, we have the peripheral components. So we have all the changes that take place in the muscles that are actually moving us, propelling us. So the capillary density to let the blood stay in those muscles longer, and the mitochondria to take that oxygen from the blood and put it to workable use. All right, so all interesting things. Long story short, consistent cardio makes a big difference with increasing that stroke volume and improving these peripheral adaptations. If you're going from running to swimming or vice versa, be patient with your endurance, because it's going to take a while to build up those peripheral adaptations, but it happens. All right, guys, so just a little bit behind the science of what's happening when you're doing your cardio and how it improves over several weeks and months. So go out there and get it.